the universal quest that I think Natasha and I were on in our books, even though we have a little bit of a different flair to our quest of understanding, finding the humanity in our parents. I feel like I had to unravel some things to get there, but that's certainly how I arrived at love and forgiveness.
So for me, I was finding adults whenever I could who seemed stable and trustworthy and loving, and I was drawing them in to to take care of me.
In this episode of Three Moms in the Trenches, we turn the tables and ask, what about the kids? What happens when your parent has schizophrenia? Our guests have each written a memoir about the experience and have a lot to say. Join us as we speak with Natasha Williams and Liz Sjaastad. Welcome to our podcast, Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. From the place where schizophrenia and real life collide. East Coast, West Coast, Middle America. With Miriam Feldman, Mindy Greiling, and Randy Kay. Well, welcome to episode 117 of Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. We are so excited tonight because many of our listeners have said, yeah, you're moms, you talk about the mom experience. Every once in a while, we want to do an episode to talk about other family members, siblings, spouses. And today it's what about the kids? When your parent has schizophrenia. And we're so delighted to bring together two wonderful writers who have written memoirs about their experience growing up with parents, one of whom has schizophrenia, and having looked at the book, the other parent not so stable either, but they will tell us their stories. And, we want to know what's the same, what's different, what their struggles are. So in a moment, we're going to bring on Natasha Williams, and I think I'm saying her name right, Liz Sjaastad. But yeah, Mindy's nodding. So, okay, so that's really good. It's been a couple of weeks, moms. I just want to say that at the moment, we're knocking wood because, and I did share this on our Facebook page. Feel free to join our page if you just Google Schizophrenia Three Moms or Moms Trenches Schizophrenia. The group will come up. We are three moms. We each have sons with schizophrenia in various stages of recovery. And my son has been through a very hard time, but at the moment he is back on meds, which I am beyond thrilled about. It is, and when I posted this on the Facebook page, because many people have been following that story, I got so many lovely and supportive comments, including, of course, from you guys, Mimi and Mindy. But you're never out of the woods, but I'll take any clearing I can get. So I was able to actually have a lovely visit with my son and take him food shopping. So that's pretty much my update. Anything for you? Mindy, is Jim doing any better?
Jim is doing better. So he, as the listeners know, moved in March to wonderful supportive housing, but he's had a tough transition and was in the hospital. And now this week, I feel more hopeful than I have the whole time he's been there. He seems to be comfortable with the staff there, and it's a lot of rotating staff, a lot of young people. But for the first time, I feel like he's kind of solid. And he went back to the gym today. He hadn't been for 2 weeks. And when he wasn't there, he went every day pretty much. He went to work today, and he's had, again, like week and 2 week gaps in going back to work, which he has to get to himself using the lift. So he needs motivation for these things. And then, but he's working with them. They forgot yesterday to give him his clozapine at the right time for his lab test today. All these things that I, the mom, was doing when he was here living with us for the last 5 years. So he and they, I think, are figuring out that they need to do more and that I'm not there. And that's a good thing, but it's been rocky and it's better today.
Moms are hard to replace.
That's a very good comment.
He
has been over for dinner the last 2 nights and plans to come again. because they don't have food at this place. You know, they used to
Ah,
have 3 meals a day in a dining room, and they changed to a different funding model starting on May 1st. And so
hmm.
he has not, even when he was there, when they had the meals, they didn't start him on them because it was ending
Ah.
soon. So that's an adjustment, not to have any regular meals.
Yeah, that is an activity of daily living that is quite a challenge sometimes. So
And
I
it's a
think
social
that's
time that they, don't
yeah.
have if they're not going to the dining room.
Get on the board and change that immediately. So much better. All right.
Well,
Well, that's
actually, one of our guests, one of our authors tonight, she may talk about this when she gets on, but she was on the board of this organization and helped raise money, Liz Sjaastad, for Jim's, the place where he is. So I thank her every
oh,
day for doing that. And so,
awesome.
yeah, maybe I'll get her back on the board again.
Okay. Well, let's just interview them for now and we'll hit them up for help later. Mimi, anything to report about Nick? Is he doing okay?
He's doing okay. A bit of a disappointment last week. I went to all kinds of lengths to get us signed up to go to a life drawing class together because we did that when we were in Virginia with my youngest daughter, Rose, and he said he wanted to do it. So we got it. We drove the hour there. And then when we were in the restaurant before we went, he started telling me he didn't feel well. And, I talked to him again about the usual about, you get anxiety and a little, nerves, but maybe you can rise above it. But he was very adamant about not feeling well. So we turned around and headed home and didn't go. And then, as if to prove me wrong, he threw up in the car on the way home. So it was just fun
Oh.
all the way around.
Well, I hate to wish this on you, but maybe he was physically ill and next week he'll
Yeah,
go.
great. Okay, so he's physically ill. There goes my brand new thought.
So moms don't know everything, I guess is
I'm
the
doing.
moral of that one.
Know very little sometimes. But anyway, whatever. We'll pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and try again.
That's pretty much our
That's a
motto.
great story.
Yeah. So, let's go ahead and bring in our two guests. We're having them on together and they've never met until this episode. So, guys, you can go ahead and unmute and bring your cameras in. So, Natasha Williams is the author of a book called The Parts of Him I Kept. I'm so interested in reading this book. I haven't finished it. I just kind of glanced at it for now. It's been a week, but you can tell us the story. But it's an intimate account of a daughter's coming of age in the face of her father's schizophrenic unraveling. And when I was checking it out, one of the reviewers said, if you read the first 30 pages, you would cancel your own wedding to read the rest of it. So that's a pretty amazing review. And Natasha Williams, and I want to introduce you to our other guest, Liz Sjaastad. And Liz has written a memoir called You're Too Young to Understand. And that is about growing up with and caring for her father and your mother, I guess. So your mother had schizophrenia? Do I have that right? Okay,
Yeah.
so both of you also mentioned the other parent without schizophrenia as not being exactly the stabling force that you could need. So, and you, Liz, want to learn to show up for yourself and find ways to love and forgiveness. And so we are so interested in your journeys. And we have a lot of questions, but why don't we begin with at least giving you just a couple of minutes to give us a sort of thumbnail description of your story. Natasha, can we start with you?
Sure. Thank you. Um, so I took 10 years to write this book, and I actually started writing it at the end when my aging dad needed assisted living, and I was faced with the short list of options for him, um, and based on sort of a long form essay, I was encouraged to write the whole memoir, and it took me 10 years to figure out what that story was.
Mm.
In the end, I started the story with the drowning of my half sister. And I really questioned whether and why to start there because she was a sister that I didn't know very well. My father and my parents separated when I was very young, and my dad had met a fellow schizophrenic at Pilgrim State, and they had 5 children together. So it is a really dark moment in time in their lives and in our life. And in the end, even though my relationship with her was minimal, I started there because I felt that this is where we often encounter people's lives when it's public and there's mental illness involved. Privately, we all live day to day with, as you know, so much sort of travail and heartache and love and inspiration um, in between. But I felt like this was an opportunity for me to start with the headlines and then take the readers into what was behind the headlines. And so that's what
That's
yeah.
a one page of the story. And you were your father's caregiver for many years of his life. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Liz, how about you?
Well, I think 10 years must be a magic number of years to get a memoir put together. I also started writing my memoir about 10 years ago, and it was when my father, who interesting life. He grew up a child in World War II in Russia. He was born in Russia and was was taken prisoner, lived as a prisoner with his mom and brothers, and then in a refugee camp in Germany before immigrating to the United States and meeting my mother at West Seattle High School. And they fell in love pretty quickly. And she had not started demonstrating any signals of schizophrenia at the time, and he had not started drinking heavily at the time. But yeah, he so they got together and had 3 children, raised us in the Midwest. He had a stroke about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, and it was sort of at that point where I had 3 kids of my own. They were relatively young, and I started to examine or want to examine more about my parents and recognizing that it was perhaps too late with my dad and probably impossible with my mother, who was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, one of the schizophrenias, when she was 48 and I was 20, was when she got her diagnosis. So anyway, she was medical power of attorney for my father. And it was a really tough time for my sister and I took that opportunity to start writing my memories and more as a way to try to understand, try to get to know my parents better, their choices, their decisions, their predicaments, and in turn, then learn a little bit about myself.
And I have to say, I have read Liz's book because I got to read her manuscript and provide a blurb for her cover. And so I know what a marvelous book that is. And Natasha, I haven't had a chance to read yours yet, but I've ordered it. So I'm looking forward to it. And just listening to what you said and having read Liz's book already, it sounds to me like you two should talk and that you have a lot in common, not just your books, but your families and everything. And one thing that struck me, Natasha, you started out with, the tragedy with one of your siblings, and Liz also wrote about that, something tragic with a couple of her siblings. And so I wonder if you could talk first about your siblings and how your parents' schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, whatever, affected you, and then how did it affect your siblings, and what was the gamut that was run between affecting of various family members?
Do you want to start, Liz, since I
Sure,
started?
I'll go ahead. Um, I think uh I think our family situation affected each of us very differently, as you might imagine it would. We're all 3 years apart. So it was my sister's the oldest. 3 years later came my brother Greg, and then 3 years later was I came. So I'm the youngest. Um, uh, and we're also each born into the world with different sensibilities and different capabilities uh, to deal with, trauma and confusion. And so I often wondered why my brother made the choices he did. And I always wondered why he didn't make different decisions for a healthier life. Um, and I kind of ruminate on that a bit in a chapter in the book. He does pass away early in life, and uh, so I kind of write a funeral piece, and I start to examine why I do think my parents and their illnesses and the family's inability to manage those at all, or even acknowledge them in some cases, um, probably impacted him the hardest. My sister, as the oldest, took on a lot of anxiety because she probably felt like she needed to care for the rest of us. And uh, and I think I just tried to survive, just tried to do what I could to get through each day. And so I don't know. I think ultimately, I wonder about this a lot, Mindy, and I saw the siblings question and I thought, ooh, I'm just going to ramble on that one because I still really haven't figured it out. I mean, we're all relatively, we're all kind of the same genetic makeup and we're all put in the same family situation, but we each kind of ended up in very different places in life.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure why about it, other than I think there's a lot of luck involved. There's a lot of, I just feel like I was very fortunate.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Because I have not read your book yet, and your mother was diagnosed when you were 20. However, I am imagining there were some erratic behaviors before the diagnosis, right? So, were there things that you and your siblings went through that you just didn't understand? That when your mother got the diagnosis, you went, oh, that's why. I mean, what are some of the things? Was she in the hospital? Did she like, can you just name a little bit some of the
Yeah,
behaviors?
it's really interesting. I'd like to highlight this because I imagine this happens in a lot of families where my mother was clearly ill when I was 7 years old. Before that, probably as well. When I asked my dad, we had very little conversations about this, but one of the times I was able to ask him, he said, well, probably about when she was 28 or so. I mean, he like knew and and I was very upset with him. Like he had done nothing, but it was never a crisis situation for us, or we never brought it to a crisis situation. She had distorted thinking. She made associations that weren't there. She thought there were um, Russian satellites that were reading her mind, and that her thoughts were broadcast to the world. She had a lot of very clearly schizophrenic thinking type thoughts and feelings of persecution, but her psychosis never went to a point where, oh, we got to get her to a hospital right now. She was never dangerous. Um, so it was a lot easier, not only because of the time in the 70s and 80s, but also, you know, because she wasn't something that had to be dealt with,
Mm.
that it was allowed to linger, and until my sister grew up, graduated college, went out into the world, came back home, and was like, whoa, this is not okay. Because, her behaviors had become such that Kate came home and saw them in a way that she hadn't before, or maybe they had really gotten that much worse, and the rest of us were just like, the frogs in the boiling water.
Yeah.
So we were able to attempt to get her help at that point in time, and that's when she got her diagnosis. So I was 20, my sister was 26, but we had lived with it. So I grew up with it. I grew up with a very, very, um, very isolating, confused. Um, my dad's alcoholism was named, so that was usually our like. I would think, well, I don't feel normal because my dad's an alcoholic. What's normal? Always looking for normal, which they say about adult children of alcoholics. But I feel like it wasn't that. It was my how I was mothered. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Natasha, can you fill us in, with the sibling question as a frame, also adding some of the things you went through as a child?
Maybe because you're all have children with schizophrenia, the first thought I had, because I was an only child of my parents, was my father's siblings and the effect of his schizophrenia on them. And, I just was very aware that they all moved very far away and, from him when they became adults. And I think it was just such a loss of childhood for them. Um, Maybe weirdly more so than me. Because their whole family centered around my father's mental illness, and he and my grandmother were very, very close. And for me, my father and I spent a lot of time alone. When you're schizophrenic and having bouts of mania and thinking that you're the Messiah and being paranoid, friends fall away really fast. And so we spent a lot of time alone. My parents were separated, and I spent weekends with him, with my grandmother kind of on site, because she was the person who really kept him housed until she died. And I mean, I think that Liz is sort of hinting at this, and yeah, I can't wait to talk to you, Liz, off camera. You know, eh, well, actually, I don't. I'm going to shift gears. The thing about my father's illness, beyond all of the psychosis and the mania, was the person that he was. And my father was a deeply, deeply kind and generous and loving man. And so I- um, to be in his presence was to feel very seen and very recognized, even in the midst of his delusional psychosis. An example I'll give you, I think I'm veering away from the question, but I don't have siblings that I knew about until much later. Um, there was a time when my father was feeling very messianic and paranoid that none of us recognized him as Christ. And, certainly we must be possessed by the devil. And The Exorcist came out when I was 8 years old. And my father saw the film without me and decided that since I was his daughter and the devil was after him, that I was at risk. And so his impulse was to take me to see The Exorcist. And when I asked him many years later why the hell he did that, he said he was trying to school me in the ways of the devil. Now, from the outside, one could say it was really bad choice on his part as a parent. I was so angry at him. Even at 8 years old, I walked out of the movie theater cursing him out. I
Hmm.
literally. But underneath that impulse was his desire to protect me from the demons that were after him. And for whatever reason, I understood that as a child. I understood his silence, his sort of you'd asked about anon
Anosognosia.
Anosognosia, yeah.
nausea, and I actually I had to look it up because I didn't know the term. What I was really aware of was that the alogia, my father's lack of words, and so for me, without siblings, was to sort of face the abyss of his ability to sort of come back to reality, to share his experience. And as a child, I spent a lot of hours trying to imagine where he went, trying to imagine what his experience was. Um, and I think as an only child of my parents, I have a sister through my mother, and I have those siblings who I make mention of and come back into the book at the end. I could have been a very impatient young woman. I'm not, and so facing my father's mental illness taught me a tremendous amount of empathy and patience.
Yeah.
You were lucky that your father sided with you. You were with him instead of having his delusions put you opposite him, which is, I think, something many people experience as mothers and children. And I wonder, and you didn't learn about anosognosia until we sent you a couple questions ahead, and there it was in there. So it's hard. You
And for
probably can't.
listeners who don't know what that is the lack of ability to realize you're ill. It's
Yes. So Liz did write about it in your book. So maybe you could talk about it from the standpoint of a child who maybe didn't have such a positive experience all the time with your family situation. And then when you did learn about it, so how did you learn about anosognosia, that your mother didn't know she was ill? And so it was hard for her to get help. And how did that affect you? And how did knowing about it help?
Yeah, such a good question. I think Mimi wants to say
I just
something.
want to say one thing before we veer away from it. Natasha, um, I understand what Mindy's saying, but I think there's something that should be identified and recognized here, and that's that, yes, your father didn't put you as in the adversarial role, as often people with schizophrenia will do, like our sons will do. I know Mindy has lived through this where her son identified her as the devil or as the enemy, and there's horrible anecdotal stories about mothers being harmed and killed and all of that. But there's something else here that I think is bigger, and that's it. When you're a child, you look to your parent to create that force field, to create that safe world for you to live in when you're a child. And when a child of 5, 6, 8, 10 is, rather than, and even if, our parents, when we're little, create for us a safe world, that's not even true, but we believe it, and that's what we need when we're children. You didn't have that. You were a cohort with your father in this scary, not real world. And you didn't know that that wasn't the real world. So that created, I would imagine, a world of, unsureness and fear and trepidation and eggshells that it's hard to even imagine. So yes, he was good to you, but he was good to you in terms of pulling you into this scary world that he lived in, which was probably a lot more than a child should have to deal with, I would think. I mean, am I projecting? It just seems to me to be not all that wonderful.
Well, I guess what I think a major thrust of my book is, like Liz, I'm trying to understand my own sort of coming of age and identity formation in the face of my father's unraveling, and and trying to figure out how that formed me, in part so that my own children don't have to sort of contend with all the unspoken, um, you know, family baggage. That definitely became a driving force. But I think the other thing I just want to say to that, Mimi, is that, people are have an illness, they live with an illness, but they are still also the person that they are. And my father happened to have had this largesse of heart and spirit that impacted people throughout his life. And it's a harrowing story. He was, prostitutes, drug dealers. He made all the wrong choices and was um taken advantage of by all the wrong people. Um, and yes, it was harrowing. Um, but I also think that you are all probably more stupendous mothers than you would have ever imagined being because of what you have faced, being a parent of a child who has schizophrenia. And I feel that Liz and I are probably, I will contend, I am a better person having had to face that. And that's really all I was trying to say.
I completely get that. And I did a talk at NAMI, and what I ended it with was schizophrenia is in regard to what you're saying about your father's large S and being able to see and hold on to that. I say schizophrenia is arguably one of, if not the worst mental illness, and it manifests itself in ways that are ugly and violent and threatening and mind-boggling. And my comfort in this whole thing, in my situation, is I look at my son and I say, here he has this awful disease, and yet even this, even schizophrenia, could not touch his goodness.
Yeah.
He is as good a human as he was on the day he was born, and he always will be. I see that golden child. And it's heartwarming to hear you say what you're saying, because you see that with your father.
Yeah.
I think I hear all that. I think there's a journey we all go through as children to get to a point, whatever our parents are, where we go, they did the best they could, and I have to grow myself up now. And your whole book, Natasha, is getting to that love and forgiveness place. And so, and I think, and we've all spoken on other episodes about how Mimi and Mindy and I find joy anyway, and we refuse to, there's finding moments of joy. So it's so wonderful to look at it from that place that you've worked so hard to get to. So, and, I know even when my son is symptomatic, he's a nice kid. So, and we take heart in that. Liz, did you want to add anything to this? You're nodding your head a lot.
Or
So,
back to my
Yeah.
question too about anosognosia.
Yeah, I can do both, I think. Um, I Yeah, I think that, my mother did not bring me in on her delusions. I was someone that she couldn't trust most of the time. Um, and it was very hard. It was very hard once I realized that she had a mental illness, um, for me to separate her from her illness, because she was a very prim and proper woman, raised that way, and very kind of stoic, had a lot of Norwegian in her, and wasn't very warm at all. So I didn't have a loving relationship with my mother, and there wasn't much of a, um, so one of my pursuits absolutely was to try to understand who she was, particularly when she and my dad fell in love. And Dr. Javier Amador was also someone who endorsed my book, and he's also on the cover with Mindy. And in his longer blurb, he talks about the universal quest that I think Natasha and I were on in our books, even though we have a little bit of a different flair to our quest, of understanding, finding the humanity in our parents. And so, I feel like I had to unravel some things to get there. But that's certainly how I arrived at love and forgiveness. With my mom and I didn't know what anosognosia was until well into my book, writing of my book. But I think I had a sense that, my sister and I would talk about it and we'd be upset that it was not, even after her diagnosis, that it was never a conversation in our family. If she wasn't going to acknowledge her illness, then we certainly could not. She just held that sort of power, you know. She, if you were in a room with her, like she controlled the tone. And, there's no way you're going to bring up the fact that she might have schizophrenia if she was not going to. So I often wondered if she thought she had it or not. And I think there was a part of me that intuitively knew that it could be part of the illness that she could not recognize that she did not have insight into it. And I did start changing my behaviors in order to build a relationship with her that were very much part of the LEAP method that Dr. Amador later. So, I mean, when I was about 30 years old, I had developed a career in organization development, and I was understanding how to change patterns in companies and with teams. And I was like, well, I should apply this to my own life. And I went home and I started just listening to my mother and not trying to argue with her and not trying to tell her what I knew was the truth, but simply to empathize. Like, oh, wow, I would also feel really, really badly if I thought, dad did that to me, and whatever it might be. And she just visibly just like relaxed and um and became much more lucid. She didn't often share her delusions, and so I didn't have many opportunities for that. Um, but the anosognosia is very powerful, as was learning what her disease, what her illness was. I think naming things is incredible in terms of allowing people to learn more and turning from anger to empathy. I think, just understanding that someone is struggling and not doing something intentionally it allows you to be much more empathetic.
Thank you. Natasha, anything to add to that?
I just wanted to say, uh, I think my father was, I know my father was aware of his illness, and we did talk about it as a family, not directly, but just coping with it, you know. But I remember in writing the book in the later years and dealing with my father when I had children, I remember feeling this frustration that, like, in all these years, with the trajectory of his life, like the reality of him not being the Messiah had never landed, that there was always this sort of subliminal, like, even in the nursing home, I remember he had this crush on this, more than a crush. I mean, his aide, they called her Frankie's wife, and she literally like left her shoes and coat in his room, and it was kind of a crazy situation. And she got pregnant, and my dad, there's a scene in the book where he's telling me he wants to get her a baby shower gift, and he wants to get her a dress. I'm like, Dad, but baby shower gifts, you get the baby a gift. And he's like, yeah. And then he breaks into this huge smile and shakes his head, and he's like, I don't know how I got hoodwinked into this whole baby thing. And I realized that he felt that um, Maya had immaculately conceived their baby, and that this was his child. And I said to him, Dad, do you really still believe that you're, the Messiah, essentially? And he shook his head. He's like, nah. But he so believed it. He's so at his core, which is certainly a form of anosognosia, but
Anosognosia.
it was
Yeah.
a slightly different tack, I think.
So at
Yeah.
that point, he had enough insight to know he shouldn't believe it, but he does.
Exactly.
Right.
Did either one of you or both of you have any stable adults, maybe another family member or someone at school or anybody that you could share with? And whether you did or didn't, what would you recommend to adults that would see what's happening to a child? What could they do to help that child? So if you had someone that helped you, and regardless, what advice do you have for adults that want to help children in your situations?
Right. And thinking of children, how much, as your adults looking back with this amazing hindsight and the glass of forgiveness and love and the big picture. But think of when you were little. What could adults do to help a child who's currently going through the confusion that you went through? Right? Is that the question, Mindy?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I can start with an answer to that question. I did some research at one point, and I was surprised to find that in developing countries, the recovery rate for schizophrenia is better. And one of the suggestions about that is that there are more extended community networks and more extended family systems there. It doesn't fall just to, the parents, and you're not as isolated, because isolation, I think, is a huge thing. So so for me, I was finding adults whenever I could who seemed stable and trustworthy and loving, and I was drawing them in to be yeah, to take care of me. I became their babysitters. I became their knock on the door, come hang out at their apartment. I just teachers. um and I think that also, my father, as a mentally ill person, found people who would stand by him and talk to him and show up. And his mother played a huge role in taking care of him. So I guess just, I think it's very unfair that parents, particularly mothers, are expected to shoulder that whole burden. And I think clearly there's a lot of other people who take care of us in our lives. And you know, yeah.
That makes a
Love
lot of
that.
sense. Mhm.
Liz?
That makes a lot of sense with the extended communities. Like it's everybody's responsibility and everyone's there to help and lend a hand. I My sister, I'll tell you, my sister found other families. She was really good at that, and they were stable, and she had her boyfriend's family in high school. Those parents loved her like she was their daughter. They were smart, thoughtful people. Again, we weren't talking about the illness, and we were talking about the alcoholism, but we hadn't identified mom's illness. And so I think she did it right. Like I think I was suspect of all adults. I think I think today that's still something I have a little bit of, I question authority. Um but so I was pretty much in escape mode. I was pretty much in, doing all the wrong things to try to find um to try to feel better and be cared for. And so I would suggest, for children now, I think the problem is like not a whole lot of people understand schizophrenia. Not a whole, even if I knew what my mother had, first of all, back in the 80s, nobody did. But even now, it's hard to find someone. I would say it would be so smart if someone knew what their parents' diagnosis was, or even if they didn't, to find a counselor and ask to talk. Um, I think it's a lot more possible today, and I see what's available to my kids through their schools and other activities, and just kind of the topic of mental health is so much more prominent now, even though serious mental illness is still a struggle for a lot of people. Yeah, just finding someone knowledgeable of the disease that can talk with that child.
Well, now you both have children. I don't know what age group they're in now, but I'm curious, are they aware of all of this? When did you talk to them about it? At what age do you think that kids are able to understand this?
Do you want to go, Natasha?
Um, sure. Um, I it was important to me that my children knew my father because of what he conveyed in the world. But I never ever left my children alone with him. Um, and um, and so they had a relationship with him that was somewhat from a distance. He came to their shows. He was the first person to start clapping at a piano recital, and the person who clapped the loudest. Um, when my kids became teenagers, I guess this is the answer to your question, they started asking me questions. My oldest daughter sat me down in the kitchen and said, "So, because Grandpa has schizophrenia and you don't, does that mean that I won't?" And I've decided I'm not going to do drugs because I understand that there's more of a risk. Well, she does.
Wow, that was amazing
That was
insight.
Wow.
amazing. She actually, I'm not sure that that was actually true, but I mean, I know now that there was some drug doing happening. Um, but, she's always, my oldest daughter has always been very sort of logical, and she's smart and very sensitive. And it's my younger daughter, actually, who I think formed more of a bond with my father. And in the book, there was a point at which my father called me and told me that Callie was schizophrenic. And I stopped speaking to him for many months. I drew a line in the sand there. And, I grappled with this in my own life. I mean, I'm actually embarrassed to say that I never thought about my children's risk for mental illness. My father's illness always felt so much his own. I just didn't even consider the genetic predisposition, and I was a molecular biology student in graduate school. I mean, you would think I would have given this some thought. Um, but I did start reading a lot about it after his prognosis. And of course, my youngest was 15 at the time, so she was actually crazy. So I was like, oh yeah, she's
Every
clearly,
every teenager is a little bit, yes.
yeah.
Does she
It's
have
hard to
schizophrenia?
tell when you got
No,
a
Okay.
teenager.
no. So, but I mean, girls are prone to schizophrenia for till a much later age, right? I think it's until their mid-30s. So my children are not out of the woods. But they've been in therapy, both of them, just normal adjustment therapy, and in a crazy world. And we have an open relationship. And um I guess what I want to just end by saying is that my youngest daughter, who's very dyslexic and didn't read much in her younger years, told me she wanted to take my book with her when she took a gap year in Europe. She was going to carry my unpublished manuscript with her. And at the time, I decided to pull that scene where my father, of course, makes his prognosis. There was no reason she needed to read that. And I pulled out every reference to it. And then when I got a publisher, and I found a minute where we were in a car and she brought up therapy, and I just asked her, how do like, you feel solid? You feel like you're okay? Because they knew that this was in our family, and she said yes, and I said, oh, good. And so there's a scene that I haven't shared with you, and I think Grandpa loved you so much, saw himself so much in you, that he just, he wanted to convey this special quality to you. And I want you to read this chapter now. So she read it and she was fine. And I sort of, I mean, to say that it didn't throw her, I think we came at it in a thoughtful way, um, and both of my children are seemingly fine, and to whatever extent genetics and circumstances come together, they don't seem to be showing a proclivity.
Something that I've thought about, and I haven't actually ever even said this to Mindy and Randy too, but because their daughters have kids, did they express fear about that? Because I'm right now where my oldest daughter has 7 kids, but my younger 2 daughters have kind of decided no kids for them, and I've never really asked them if it's some sort of fear of the genetics and all of that. Did your daughters discuss that with you guys?
My daughter hasn't really discussed it. She has one child and
Who's been on our
decided that,
podcast, right?
yeah, our daughter, yeah, Angela discussed this, I think, maybe on our podcast. I can't remember when we had our daughters on. But I haven't discussed it with her, but I always thought one child might have been part of her thinking because Jim is her younger brother.
Mhm.
And I
You still
myself,
kind of walk on eggshells a little bit with
yeah, and my daughter's uh, going to turn 50 next year, so she's out of the woods, I think. But you never know. But I have thought of my granddaughter, and so I have given her stern lectures about not using drugs given her genetics, and she has pretty much, I think, followed that. So I've thought about it a lot. My grandmother had schizophrenia, Natasha and Liz. So um, I was always worried about myself, and I minored in psychology for both my BA and my MA, and I was always looking at myself and how that would play out. And I actually never thought about it with my daughter because she was so normal and always has been. And so anyone that knows her, I don't think there's this inch of her that would possibly be susceptible to schizophrenia. But now with my granddaughter and drugs so prevalent, I'm once again on the, looking. So Liz, for the same question.
Yeah. I decided when I was 13 I wasn't going to have children. And I it's because I didn't want to become like my mother, and but I didn't know what I was saying when I said that. Um, you know, uh, so because we didn't know what she was dealing with. Um, my husband and I ended up being very thoughtful and intentional about our decision to have children. It wasn't an immediate, oh, of course you get married and have children. Um, I looked up the statistics at that point, and there was nobody else in our extended family that we were aware of that had schizophrenia, and it just didn't seem like there was that big of an increase in likelihood that my children would develop it. At the time, I didn't think it was significantly worrisome. My kids are now 18, 20, and 22. And my 22-year-old is about to graduate from Carleton College, and she wants to go to med school. The 20-year-old is at the University of Puget Sound. She's going to study in Ecuador in the fall, and she's looking into environmental science. And my youngest is here at home with me, and he is going to be a senior next year. And he also, Natasha said, I know, Mom, cannabis is something I should not be messing around with, and I've told my friends, I'm not doing it. So it's just good to hear, not knowing for sure if the follow through was there, but I think it'll always be a concern. But I'm concerned about a lot of things with my kids, so I don't, I look out for a lot of things, sadness as well as just, distorted thinking. So
Yeah. Parenthood, even without anything in your family, parenting's a big risk.
yeah.
You never know what you're going to get. And so, believe it or not, we're nearing the end of our time, and I'll just briefly answer your question, Mimi. My daughter's kids are first, second, and third grade, so they're still very young. What keeps running through my mind is early detection, early detection, early detection, and no cannabis. So, we're keeping our eyes open. We are, of course it crosses your mind. Of course it crosses your mind, but we keep our eyes open. And if my daughter ever expresses some worry about it, is that, we will catch it early. No one, I was blindsided. I didn't even know what schizophrenia was, much less anosognosia. Like, I'm just like, why is he having such a weird adolescence? So, armed with education, it's a much, much better. We're going to have a guest on the podcast. Um, Mimi and Mindy, we have to pick the date, but of a young man who has written a book about his own schizophrenia, and he it was caught early. I mean, he's about to start NYU full time and has written a book about his experience, and he credits the early detection for, so there's many, many stories, even if the worst happens.
What's the
I would
title
like,
of that book, Randy?
it is, I am going to put it in the show notes because it's downstairs. His name is Wyatt Forte. And you know what? I'm just going to look it up right now, and then I'll edit this part out. Let's see. Wyatt is very clear about his, those not so little voices, from adolescent psychosis to wellness and empowerment.
Sounds great.
Yeah, he's a really, really wonderful kid and young man, I should say. And so we're very excited to hear his story as well. So Wyatt, shout out to you. I would like to end with each of you just sharing again the title of your book, how people can get in touch with you, other links that you'd like us to know about, how we can help you on your journeys, just final words to people. And Natasha, do you feel prepared to go first with that?
Yes, I actually would love to um, just end with a couple of things that I've learned. On Track New York is a multi-pronged approach to early psychosis treatment and detection. It's a wonderful model. If it's not in your state, it's something to know about. I've been learning about it through the public speaking and presenting, and also the Hearing Voices Network, which I'm sure you guys have heard of, which just strikes me as sort of a 12-step program for folks who are hearing voices. And also for me, adult children of alcoholics meetings were really helpful, 12-step program meetings, because it's a very similar, idea of grappling with not having control over your environment. So I just kind of I didn't get to that earlier. Um, I hope that you'll all read this book. I feel like it touches people in a way that is so gratifying to me. My goal is to humanize living with mental illness and caring for people who live with mental illness. And I think it's essential as the numbers of people who are grappling with severe mental illness is increasing. And as the world gets more complicated, I think our stories mean a lot in the world. And what you three in the trenches are doing to share those stories is really important. Title of the book is The Parts of Him I Kept, The Gifts of My Father's Madness. I have a website, natashawilliamswriter.com. There are links to buy the book. There are excerpts. And thank you for having me. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Liz?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Natasha has said, and I cannot wait to read your book. I think we have some very similar themes and experiences, and I've enjoyed reading all of the memoirs. I think if you haven't read Laura Flynn's Swallow the Ocean, that's a good one from about 12 years ago, maybe more now. Anyway, my book is You're Too Young to Understand, and my website is lizsjaastad.com. Of course, it's LIZSJAASTAD.com. And I truly believe that sharing our stories is the way that we make things speakable. We get help for people, we get resources, and the reason why they're hard to talk about is because we've kept them silent. So these stories and these books are really important, and your podcast is incredible in that, in helping. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Schizophrenia, 3 Moms in the Trenches. You can help out the podcast and help others by sharing the podcast and by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts and or on YouTube. And remember, you can reach us at mindygreiling.com, randyk.com, or miriam-feldman.com.